He and my father were associated at the Bank of Jamestown, and Jackson did work for the Bank of Jamestown. I think at one point he was general consular. And he always was interested in horses and belonged to the Jamestown Saddle Club. They bought the stock farm from the Bank of Jamestown for $5,000, and that included the barn and 88 acres. And it was in the Depression. And Bob apparently decided he didn't want to try to keep the horses. They didn't have a good place to ride, road ride, and which he enjoyed doing. He didn't want to keep them in his home. So the fact that he was voted one of the 10 best men, best dressed men in the country at one point, that was quite an accolade in those days. You would never know it because he could put on old clothes, and they were really old, and he was just another hired hand at the stock farm.
Just for the heck of it, describe Bob Jackson.
Well, Jackson, as I knew him, of course, he was, for the most part, it was in recreation, and he would come up on, Irene didn't ride very much. She had a show horse, and she would go to the horse show, and she'd ride a little bit, but mostly it would be Bob and my father and my uncle and myself. I was an only child, so it was just understood that I went horseback riding every Sunday morning.
Right.
And so we'd go riding back, they were all dirt roads back of the Lakewood Road, or back of, all back, the Hunt Road was all dirt, and it was dirt all the way back to Sugar Grove, no paved roads.
Right.
And so we could ride on those dirt roads, and there were some cars, of course, but there wasn't the traffic there is today, and there wasn't the speed there is today.
Right.
And so we could ride, and we'd often come out fairly early and ride to Sugar Grove and have breakfast at a little inn there in Sugar Grove. Me, Jackson, and my father, and Elmer Selstrom, and myself. And when Jackson went to Washington, he commuted for quite a while. And he would have a fellow by the name of Don Ferguson was kind of his chauffeur, as well as Clyde Anderson, and he'd drive him to Warren to catch the train. You know, that was the way he went to Washington. I don't know how long it was that he did this, but it was quite a while. He didn't move to Washington. They took this apartment in Wardman Park so that eventually, because Bill was going to St. Albans and Mary went to Cathedral School, and the apartment was in the Wardman Park there. And but you asked what Jackson was like. Well, he had a little temper.
Did he?
I've seen him get awful upset with Bill. I remember when we were working on the barn up there that he had some boyfriends up. Bill did, Dick Sharp and a fellow by the name of Van Black and myself. We were all there, and they brought 22 rifles. This was probably, we were probably 14, 15, something like that. And there were windows in the one end of the barn, and so to have something to shoot at, they shot out some of the windows. And I guess they were cracked anyway, but they shot out the windows. And Bill had a Crosley air rifle that was up there. For the purpose was to have it there. The reason Bob went along with it was that we had a lot of rats in the old barn, and we shot the rats.
Sure.
And that was quite a hobby, to go and sneak around and find a rat and shoot it.
Right.
And
Understand.
and we got rid of the rats eventually in the barn. It was an old barn, but it served the purpose. And anyway, Bob got awful mad at Bill, and he gave him an awful dressing down, and he became very florid. And I remember I trembling, even though he wasn't mad at me. I didn't have a gun, so I wasn't blamed. Well, I can remember one time that I found a snake up in the pasture, and I had it by the tail. It was a little garter snake, and I came down to show it to everybody because, you know, kids
Sure.
think that's great. And Bob was deathly afraid of snakes, and he just went into a tizzy over that snake, and I had to get rid of it. And he was floored again
Yeah.
over that snake. But he was a smiley person. He smiled a lot, and he was very agreeable and pleasant company. I remember that on one of our rides down there where Baker Street, there was a cemetery. It's still there at the corner of Baker Street and Big Tree, little old cemetery. And there was a little road into it, or right on the side of it or something, and there was a car parked there on Sunday morning. And there were a couple lovers in the back seat, and they were up kind of in the cemetery. And Bob rode his horse, and we all did up to see why that car was in the cemetery and was going kind of jumping up and down. So Bob put his foot on the bumper of the car while he still was on his horse, and flexed the car a little bit on the springs, and he said, "You need any help?" And there was just deathly silence from in the car.
Yeah.
And I said, "Apparently not." He thought that was awful funny. I didn't see why it was so funny. I guess I was pretty naive at that point. And we went on our our way to Sugar Grove. Except that I remember being up on my little boat with Bill one time and approaching the Alibi, which was his cruiser. They had a 4-bunk cruiser, about I suppose it was 33 feet long, 30 feet long, something like that. They kept it up at just towards Lakewood from Celeron, the little boathouse there.
Okay.
And we came up in Bainbridge Colby, and Jackson were having quite a visit on the stern of the boat. They had a little stern area, and they were talking, and we were up in the front, and Bob Jackson said, "Now, Bill, you go ahead, you boys go ahead and do what you're doing, because Mr. Colby and I want to visit." And so they were talking hard. Of course, they had a lot to talk about, I'm sure. And Jackson was probably picking the former secretary to Wilson's brain. The Secretary of State he was to Woodrow Wilson. I had a horse named Worthwhile, and she liked Worthwhile, and I kind of lost interest in horses as I got to be more of a teenager and older and independent and could drive a car. And going up every Saturday or Sunday to ride horseback to Sugar Grove didn't appeal to me too much. And but Mary kind of took over, and she showed Worthwhile in various shows and did very well. She usually won the road hack class. Worthwhile was a bay. Well, yeah, it was not a dark bay, a light bay, but three-gated, and Worthwhile could really trot. I was a member of the Round Table at 210, and Ernest Cockcroft and my father, and at the Round Table one day when I was there, Jackson was there. My father would invite me occasionally, and they were always very courteous, and they said it was good to have somebody of another generation and so on. That didn't happen often, but I happened to be there. And Jackson, and I don't remember the details of why, but he had some run-in with Truman. And he was saying, and making no bones about it, Jackson was very forthright. And he didn't play politics. It didn't matter who or what. If he thought something was right or wrong, he said it.
Right.
And he was very forthright, even while Truman was president, that he didn't think much of Harry Truman. And Jackson had quite a sense of humor, and they would visit, the three of them, as they rode horseback, and I would overhear him, and he would talk about current events, and they'd talk about local situation. My family were all Republicans, and he was a Democrat, and they didn't always agree. but they were good friends.